Chapter 20 to 21. Time is not supposed to be complicated. It's a one-way street, and you live out your life going ever so slightly further along the grand highway of the universe. But then human beings just had to go and invent time travel, and make everything that much more difficult. For instance, on one fine day in the year 764, time split. In one timeline a dark future awaited, but a single warrior traveled to the past to rewrite history, and try and prevent the nightmare from ever starting. On the same day as the split, only a few minutes before the warrior's arrival in the past, a dark, spider-like craft silently entered the solar system, gently coasting through the void as its immensely powerful engines powered down. A harsh voice from one of the occupants echoed around the main deck. "How long until we arrive, father?" A mechanical tail thrashed impatiently against the floor, leaving cracks in the metal. "Calm yourself, Cooler," a much larger figure, reclining in a throne and sipping from a wineglass, replied to the first speaker. "We will enter Earth's orbit in mere moments. Then we can find the super saiyan you spoke so much of." "Are you absolutely certain they are on Earth?" Cooler asked, ignoring the previous answer. "If you continue this impertinence, I may have to demonstrate why it is I, not you, that really runs this galaxy," the towering horned figure snapped. "But to answer your question, yes, I am 100% sure. As per your incessant whining, I have been monitoring the entire empire, and several beings matching your descriptions were located on this planet. They are here, and the sooner we're done with this the better. It's all a giant waste of time, if you ask me." "Father. They killed my elite squadron, and mortally wounded me." "So?" "It was just Goku's luck. He had to sense the enormous, evil power level right in the middle of his breakfast. He swallowed a mouthful of pancakes, wiping his mouth and jumping to his feet. "Sorry, Chi-Chi, I gotta go." "What? Why?" His wife eyed him with suspicion. "An enormous evil presence just appeared on the planet. I don't like it, I'm gonna go check it out." He disappeared out the doorway. "Wait. I'm going too." Gohan ran up to his room, throwing off his clothes and pulling on his orange gi. Chi-Chi stormed up the stairs after him. "Oh, no you don't, young man. You get right back." She skidded into the bedroom to find an open window and a quickly vanishing orange figure soaring off into the sky. "Here, oh, Gohan, why do you have to be so brave? You're just a little kid." Goku and Gohan landed in the middle of the eastern wasteland, on a plateau overlooking the ship, which had come to a rest on Earth. Mere moments later, they were joined by Piccolo, Nail, Tien, Yamcha, Krillin and Zarbon, all flying in from different directions. "So, you guys felt it too, huh?" Goku asked, to a chorus of assent. "Hey, is it just me, or is that energy signal familiar?" Tien stared down at the ship, squatting like a giant ugly insect on the landscape. "Yeah, now that you mention it." Goku frowned. "Of course." "Huh?" Krillin glanced around at the concerned faces. "What did I miss?" "I'm lost, too," Zarbon admitted. "Of course." Nail nodded, realizing. Not everyone was on Namek, and Zarbon couldn't sense ki back then. "Cooler is in that spaceship." "Cooler?" Yamcha, who had been dead by the time Cooler had arrived on Namek, put his head in his hands. "That's it. We're dead. We're all dead." "Thanks so very much, Raditz, nice job killing him." Goku lightly punched Yamcha on the arm in an attempt to shut him up, accidentally knocking the much weaker fighter to the ground. Goku attempted to raise everyone's spirits. "Alright, let's stay calm. I wish we didn't have to fight, but knowing Cooler, I think it's fairly safe to say it's going to happen. There's more of us this time, maybe we have a chance." "I think you're avoiding the elephant in the room." Tien grimaced. "There's a second power in that ship, even higher than Cooler's. Any way you look at it, this isn't good." Cooler walked out onto the surface of the Earth, stepping out of his vessel's shadow. I was expecting a dump, but this planet isn't bad." His metallic feet clicked on the rocky ground. Cooler had been heavily modified, robotic parts added to compensate for the grievous injuries suffered on Namek. He was entirely mechanical from the waist down, and had various smaller bionic parts on his upper body. "Perhaps we should sell it, then, when we're done here?" King Cold, his father, asked. Cold was massive, having to duck to get through the ship's hatch. He somewhat resembled Frieza's second form, with his size, imposing musculature and upwards curving horns, but he was easily larger than any form of either of his sons, and his purple coloration was a much deeper shade than Frieza's. He wore customized black armor, and a richly fashioned cape hung from his shoulders. No. Cooler was firm. He dies, and then his planet. I will leave no trace that the saiyan race ever existed. Soldiers began to file out and examine the surrounding area. Very well. King Cold shrugged, tossing his wineglass aside for a hapless flunky to catch before it broke. Let's just find this Super Saiyan, kill him and be done with it, agreed? Apparently, that's the only thing we can agree on, Cooler muttered. Alright, let's, He noticed a humanoid figure in the distance, partially obscured by the heat haze, walking slowly towards them. Who is that? All eyes turned to the distant newcomer. Abruptly, the figure flickered and reappeared much closer, continuing its unhurried approach. I don't know this one, Cooler said dismissively. Must be a local. Sir, a bird-like soldier reported, tapping his scouter, power levels only 10. Orders? Just kill the little primate. Cold snapped. We've wasted too much time already, and I can't be bothered to listen to some primitives babbling. The soldier nodded, raising his arm-mounted blaster and firing off a shot. It arced through the air, but before it hit home, the approaching figure vanished. The wind picked up, and an invisible force seemed to collide with the soldiers one by one, each trooper collapsing to the floor, unconscious, but not dead, only the minimum amount of force necessary used to knock each one out. King Cold wrinkled his nose in displeasure. You know, some of those troops were equal in power to the Jinyu force. That really wasn't very considerate of you. He was following something with his eyes, and Cooler was doing likewise. Oh, and you can stop running around like that. Your speed may have been sufficient to let you evade our soldiers' senses, but we can see you just fine, and dashing back and forth just makes you look silly. A blue blur condensed into a human being, standing silently 10 meters from the frost demons. Yes, well done. You can hide your power level and are an accomplished fighter. Cooler spoke up, getting agitated. But you're starting to annoy me, with your acting superior and giving us the silent treatment, and people who annoy me don't last long in this world. He extended one hand and fired a thick purple energy beam. This should clear up this mess, and then we can get down to business. There was a burst of golden light, and the stranger exploded with power, their body enveloped in a bright yellow aura before the beam engulfed them. Cooler's attack faded, revealing empty, barren ground. The intended target stood several meters to the side, having dodged at the last second. The intense heat and emanating power incinerated the unconscious soldiers, and internal explosions rocked the nearby ship as sensors and instruments backfired. Ah, so this is the Super Saiyan you spoke of? King Cold asked, raising an eyebrow. No, this isn't him. Cooler shrank back in fear. Another one? Well, the description seems accurate, golden aura, high power, hair standing up. Father. He crippled me and threw me into the heart of an exploding planet. I'd remember him anywhere, and this is not Raditz. Fine, then. Cold sighed. We'll just kill them all, one by one if we have to. He was about to tell his son that he'd be happy to stand back and let Cooler deal with it himself, when a roar of pure rage came from in front of the demons, and the Super Saiyan was upon them. Whoa. Check it out. Krillin shielded himself from the shockwaves of power. Whoever that guy is, he's putting out power like nothing I've ever seen before. And he's a Super Saiyan. Tien blinked, then pinched himself. No, not dreaming. I wondered what it looks like. Goku grinned. Wow, look at him go. He just ripped Cooler into pieces with his bare hands, like it was nothing. I'm sure it helped that Cooler didn't transform, but our boy may just have been able to handle him anyway, Tien added. There was another battle cry, and another flash of light. I couldn't even follow that one. Gohan said, open-mouthed in shock. Me either. Goku narrowed his eyes, squinting to see if he could follow it better, both with his 5 conventional senses and his key detection. But it looks like the big guy behind Cooler just got blown away. Man, I don't know who that guy is, but he couldn't have picked a better moment to intervene, we'd have stood no chance ourselves. I wonder who he is. All the Saiyans except Raditz, Vegeta, and me are supposed to be dead, but that doesn't feel like Raditz or Vegeta. Excuse me. Nail hadn't spoken in a while, as opposed to Piccolo, who hadn't spoken at all. I may not be an expert in human and Saiyan biology, but I believe that he is a she-dot. Really? Goku looked down at the stranger, who, with all enemies obliterated, was powering back down to normal, and back up at Nail. How can you tell? Namikian hearing is extremely sensitive, Nail explained. She was shouting, incoherently, I might add, while she killed those two, and it was definitely a female voice. Yeah, but, Yamcha was about to explain why a girl couldn't possibly be such a powerful fighter, then stopped as he realized there wasn't really a reason at all. Okay. Hello up there. The mystery girl was looking up and waving, calling out to the assembled group. Can we talk? I don't want to fight you or anything. Cautiously, the Earth's defenders flew down to the plain where the invading army had stood moments before. Hi, Goku said, smiling and holding out a hand. That was amazing. But I have to wonder, how is it that you're a Super Saiyan? The girl shook his hand, doing her best to smile, but it was clear she hadn't had much experience. She was in her mid to late teens, quite tall with dark blue hair that hung in loose curls down to her shoulders, and had an air of constantly being on edge about her. She wore a scuffed blue jacket, which interestingly enough bore the Capsule Corporation logo on the left shoulder. Underneath, she wore a plain black vest and trousers, all a little worn. Over her back was slung a red fighting staff, which those whose senses were developed enough to watch the battle would have noticed she used to knock out the common soldiers before transforming. It's complicated. I'm not sure how much it's safe to tell you, without, well, anyway, it's very difficult. I came here to deliver a warning, but I want to wait until you're all here. All here? Goku looked confused as he considered this, his brain not quite yet reaching the question of, how does she know us? What do you mean by that? I mean that in a few minutes Raditz is going to return to Earth, and if I told you everything now, I'd just end up repeating it. Follow me, I know where he'll arrive. The puzzled group, having pretty much figured out that asking how and why wasn't getting anywhere, simply followed the strange girl through the air. They landed in a patch of rocky ground that looked exactly like the patch of rocky ground they had been standing on in the first place, only minus a spaceship. The girl stood perfectly still, looking expectantly up at the sky. 10 minutes passed. Piccolo was meditating. Yamcha was practicing his wolf fang fist on some unfortunate rocks. Zarbon was pacing. Goku was half asleep, yawning as he tried to pay attention to Gohan's babbling on about a bird he'd seen that morning. Be patient, is all the girl would say. Another 10 minutes, and a pinpoint of light appeared in the vast blue sky. It grew into a spherical shape, which crashed into the ground at full speed. It always seemed impressive and dangerous to onlookers, but it was probably just the way the Planet Trade Organization's transport pods were designed to land. That, or the saiyan inside simply had no idea how to fly the thing. The fighters approached the smoking crater, peering down into it as the pod's hatch cracked open. And just as predicted, Raditz stumbled out, dressed in plain brown, somewhat ragged clothes. He gave a small smile as he saw everyone looking down at him from the rim of the crater, and floated up to meet them. Well, hello again. He stretched, breathing deeply. Ah, feels good to be out of that cramped little pod. Well, sorry, I took so long getting home. Damn thing's controls made no sense. These new models, I swear, don't make 'em like they used to. So, how come you all knew I was coming? He was tackle-hugged by Gohan, and silently acknowledged the boy's affections with a pat on the head, grinning to see Goku alive and well. Ask her, Krillin replied, whoever she is. You just missed one hell of a show. Yes, I was wondering about that. Raditz folded his arms, turning to look at the girl. I was racing Cooler and his father home. His father, came an outburst from the side. Shush, Yamcha. Krillin hissed. And I was going to intercept them as soon as they got to Earth, Raditz continued, ignoring the human's interruption, when their energy disappeared. And for a short time another huge power appeared. He indicated her. That was you? She nodded. I guess, now you're all here, I should give you an explanation. About damn time, Piccolo muttered, receiving a glare from Nail. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. She sighed. I can't really explain. If all goes according to plan, you'll understand in time, but I can deliver the warning I came to give you. She looked much more serious all of a sudden. In 3 years' time, I've got the exact time and date written down, she said, handing Gohan a piece of paper with some hasty scrawling on it. 2 androids will appear. Terrible, evil beings, even more powerful than a Super Saiyan. They'll destroy everything, hunt down all remnants of humanity for sport. The world will become a living nightmare. She looked at each of them in turn. I'm telling you this because if you know it's coming, you can train harder, anticipate the threat. I might be able to help you, as well, but I can't promise anything. It's really down to you, you have to change the future for the better. Assuming we believe you, Piccolo asked, what happens to us? Do these androids kill us, too? Most of you. Look, I've got personal reasons, but there's some things I'd rather only share with Goku, alright? This got mixed reactions. Better than not telling anyone, I suppose. Raditz flexed his muscles a little. But before you two take off to go talk in private, tell me, how do you know what's more powerful than a super saiyan? He set his jaw, his expression hardened, and, with a slight burst of ki that sent the fighters closest to him staggering back, made his super saiyan transformation for the first time since returning to Earth. This was the first time many of them had seen this legendary golden warrior. I guess I forgot, your friends never did have time to fill you in on the details. She furrowed her brow, gritted her teeth, and a second golden aura burst into life. Her hair and eyes shined with intense power. Whoa, too much. Yamcha complained, standing even further back, in awe of such powerful, almost mythical beings. Well, that I didn't expect. Raditz looked intently at the other Super Saiyan. So that's what it looks like from the outside. Anyway, it would explain how you defeated Cooler and his father so easily. Whoa. He flinched to the left on a reflex as the girl threw a sudden punch at his head. A low growl rose from her throat as she continued to launch quick, short-ranged attacks, Raditz stepping from side to side and avoiding each one. It didn't take long for him to get fed up, and he swept her legs out from under her, knocking her onto her back. She breathed out, returning to her normal state, and he did likewise. That was uncalled for, he said sternly. Sorry. She held up a hand in apology. I lose mental control when I transform. But I'm impressed, they said you were good, but you're amazing. Raditz couldn't help smiling at this. You flatter me. So, you were testing me? Seems as good a way as any. You're quick, but your technique lacks precision. You should work on that. She nodded, standing up and turning to Goku. All right. Now, if you don't mind. Goku followed her into the air. All right. Let's talk. What I'm about to tell you is the history that originally happened. It should have happened, so to speak. Cooler and his father arrived on Earth, but Raditz was able to get here in time to defeat them. Unfortunately, he made a mistake, and I'm sorry to say, Goku, it was kind of your fault. You urged him to spare King Cold's life, and, though I don't know exactly what happened in your conversation, he did. Cold, by this point, was unconscious and all his soldiers were too scared to intervene. Cooler was dead. So Cold and his men were forced to flee, and that was the last we saw of them for quite some time. 3 years of peace followed, in which I was born. The girl's monologue was interrupted as Goku's brain finally made a connection. Aha! You're the child of one of us. He grinned, pleased with himself. They were standing in the flat wasteland, a couple of miles away from the others. That explains the capsule corp jacket, and how come you're like a saiyan and a human at the same time? So, do I have a daughter, or? No, Raditz is my father. The strange girl reached up and flicked the sides of her unruly black bangs behind her ears, revealing just how much she resembled her father with her hair back. She stood in Raditz's familiar pose, confident but always slightly on edge, a stark contrast to Goku's carefree half-slouch. Wow, cool. Raditz gets to be a dad. So, who's the mother? Goku didn't bother asking, so, how are you almost an adult? He reckoned she'd get to that eventually. Launch. I believe you know her. If I'm careful not to alter history in too many ways, I'll be born sometime in the next 3 years. Launch will have a baby girl, and she'll name her Break. She trailed off, thinking of her mother. She wished she had known her better. Launch, huh? With Raditz? Who'd have thought? Goku laughed out loud. That's great. He managed to calm himself down. Go on. All right. Break continued her story. We're still not sure what King Cold was doing for 3 years. Our best theory is that his empire was falling apart at the seams without his sons, and he was rushing around the galaxy trying to keep it together. Maybe he was scared of another defeat. But whatever happened, he returned to get revenge for his humiliation. This time, he was in his 3rd form. So, he could transform too? Goku asked, and Break nodded. He never got a chance to today, in either timeline. Fortunately, Raditz made quick work of him, as I did. But when he returned in his 3rd form, Raditz was no match for him, even as a Super Saiyan. And even with help from Earth's most powerful warriors, Cold was untouchable. Plus, based on your previous encounters with Frieza and Cooler on Namek, everyone feared that he had at least one more form left. They were completely outmatched by this terrifying enemy, and it was getting to the point of no hope. So, as a last resort, my brave father used a technique he'd learnt while in space to save us all: instant transmission. It let him instantaneously move himself and anyone he touched to anywhere he could see or sense. Sounds pretty bad. Goku added, his demeanor shifting from its typical light-heartedness into concern for the lives of his friends and family, even those from a different version of history. So, did he move cold to some distant location in space, then come back to Earth? No. Break's face darkened. Staring at the ground in frustration, the girl ground a small rock into dust with her foot. That wouldn't have worked. Cold's race can survive in the depths of space, and he would have just come back again. Plus, I don't think my father had enough range to get them outside the solar system. Raditz. She paused, a sudden rush of emotion making her almost choke on the words. He teleported himself, and Cold with him, into the heart of the sun. It was a surprise. Apparently, he'd obviously experienced a great deal of change since first coming to Earth, but nobody would have ever expected such a selfless deed from him. Goku looked over at his brother's distant figure. He did that? That's, Naturally, the Dragon Balls were gathered to bring him back. But of course, that had to be the day when the android struck. The girl clenched her fists in anger once again. Even the thought of those two gave her a sense of panic, a feeling of constantly looking over your shoulder, always fearing the end might be moments away. Yeah, you mentioned them. Goku hopped up and down with excitement. Another enemy more powerful than a Super Saiyan was coming. This he wanted to hear. Are they tough? They're monsters. She gave her father's signature scowl at the mere mention of the duo terrorizing her world. They struck a random city, for fun, I guess, and destroyed one of the Dragon Balls before they'd all been collected. Before Kami could recreate the ball, it was over. The planet's strongest fighters, Tien, Krillin, Yamcha, Piccolo, Nail, Zarbon, everyone died. Only a few of us escaped. Over the next 17 years, they've been hunting down and destroying the last remnants of humanity. It's a living nightmare, we have to stop it from ever happening. And, do I die fighting the androids? Goku gulped. You didn't mention me. I'm sorry. She shook her head. You died of a heart virus during the 3 years of peace. It's unknown now, but in my time we have a cure. She pulled a small vial out of her pocket and tossed it to Goku. Here. Take it. If you ever catch a seemingly untreatable disease, it'll cause fever, chest pains, and eventually incapacitation. Death follows in a couple of days. Wow, thanks. Goku clutched the vital medicine in his hand. Hearing how you're gonna die, then being given a chance to avoid it in advance, that's so weird. Heh heh. And that brings me to the last part of my story. It might answer any remaining questions you have. Bulma, a woman I believe you know very well, was one of the survivors. She's like the mother I never had, really, and we're all extremely lucky to have her. As you know, she's a scientific genius, and recently in my time, about 20 years from now to you, she finished her latest creation, a vehicle capable of traveling through time. Unfortunately, once again disaster struck at the worst possible moment. Age 784. The building was disguised to look like just another ruin dotting the landscape, but inside, it was a fully working multidisciplinary laboratory, with salvaged equipment from 2 decades of scavenging. Bulma, assisted by her son Trunks, spent most of her time there, staying awake on determination and enough coffee to supply a small nation. Her work, however, had finally paid off. The time machine, roughly spherical, with a glass cockpit bubble and balanced on the ground on several spindly metal legs, stood just outside the lab, ready to go. It was bright yellow, proudly bearing the Capsule Corporation logo as a memory of old times, and the time and place coordinates were already programmed in. It just needed a passenger. All right, Gohan said. He was a grown man now, with old scars and a world-weary look on his face, but an air of hope always seemed to shine through. He was still wearing his Turtle School GI to honor his father, whom he hadn't seen since he was a child. With him were Bulma, wearing her pajamas from 3 nights before and with the mandatory coffee mug in hand. Last night, putting on the finishing touches, had been one of those nights. Trunks, her son, bearing the same pale green skin as his deceased father and a mess of lavender hair, an oddity. Surely purple would be a result of red and blue hair, not green and blue, mixing, that had never been adequately explained. standing beside her in casual shirt and jeans, and Break, smiling as she thought of the possibility that they might actually have a chance to put things right. Gohan continued speaking. Are we all clear on the plan? Trunks nodded. Whoever goes has to take out Cooler and King Cold before Raditz arrives, or at least stop him from sparing Cold's life, and deliver the medicine to Goku. Then, they'll have to warn the whole group of what's coming. Break picked up where he left off. So, with Goku and Raditz still alive, and 3 years of preparation, they'll stand a much better chance against the androids than we did in our timeline. She almost couldn't believe it. What if they actually could do it? It seemed too good to be true, and in her world, if something seemed too good to be true, it usually was, so naturally, she had her doubts, although she put them down to habitual paranoia. But more than that, she desperately wanted to be the one to go back. The chance to meet her parents, for what was basically the first time she'd been too young to remember them before, was incredible. Not to mention all the legendary figures Gohan was always telling them about, Goku and Piccolo and Tien and all the others she'd heard of but never seen. Right. I see you've all done your homework, Gohan replied, smiling a little. If you looked closely, you could still see the optimistic little boy who went to space and back for the sake people he'd barely known. But the happy light in his eyes was dimmed, and sometimes it just seemed like he was tired of living. Then again, the life he led, who wouldn't be? That's wonderful. Bulma yawned, trying to take a sip of coffee but missing her mouth. But I haven't slept in 72 hours, so could we just hurry up and save the future already? Ah, calm down, Mom, Trunks said, laughing. This is important. So, there's only one thing left to decide, who's going? Gohan considered this. On balance, I think the person going back is in the most danger, and has the most difficult job. Since you two are just kids, and no offense, Bulma, you're no fighter, I think I should go. No way. I can handle it. Trunks protested. Besides, we need you here. Hey, Break cut in, I'm much more powerful than you, Trunks, I'd be able to take care of myself a lot easier. But yeah, Gohan, you should stay. What if the androids, Her quivering voice trailed off, interrupted from above by a terrifying shadow. Oh, do go on, the cruel voice called out. What if the androids do what? All eyes turned upwards in fear, not now. They were so close. Damn. Gohan mentally cursed himself for holding this talk outside. The time machine itself needed to be outdoors to work, but they should have waited until they had absolutely sorted everything out before wheeling it out. We've left ourselves exposed, Goku or Raditz would never have made a mistake like this. Gohan emptied his mind, achieving mental balance and powering up to Super Saiyan. Bulma. Get inside, he shouted, and she scrambled in through the door. There was a passage underground, she'd know the plan. The lab would be empty of people and vital equipment within 2 minutes. Gohan just hoped he could hold them that long. The androids descended to the opposite side of the small clearing between the ruined buildings. 17, a black-haired teenage boy wearing a red scarf, stood slightly in front of 18, a blonde girl of similar age in a denim jacket. They were almost exactly equal in height and build, giving a strange overall appearance, opposite yet the same. Well, 17, look at this merry little gathering, how rude of them to start without us, 18 said, in her all-too-familiar mocking tone. Gohan's mind raced. He was sure he could drag out the fight long enough that Bulma could evacuate the lab and escape. But he'd probably lose his own life in the process. That was bad enough, but Break, Trunks, and the time machine were here too. He couldn't think of any way to distract both of the killer machines long enough to get the kids and the machine to safety. Break. Trunks' voice cut through the nervous silence. Get in the time machine. Go. I know Gohan won't leave us to face them, it has to be you. Trunks. Break stared, shock creeping onto her face. You'll die if you try and fight them. Don't you think I know that? Trunks' eyes began to fill with tears. These things killed my father. I won't run away when I can give you a chance to change all this. With a start, the Saiyans realized that the boy had never actually fought the androids, he'd always held more of a support role, aiding escapes and moving bystanders to safety. He was a fairly competent fighter, but definitely not on the level of a Super Saiyan, and with no real battle experience except training with the others. He'd always wanted to fight, but reluctantly agreed that he'd only be getting himself killed. Hurry, before they attack. He yelled, turning to face the androids, who looked like they were growing bored. Get out of here. His mind was made up, and Break knew he wasn't going to budge. "Alright." She sniffed a little. "I won't forget you," she promised, climbing into the time machine. Her voice betrayed her sense of fear, the worry that she might never return, and if she did, everyone she cared about would be dead. "Come on, turn on already." The initiation sequence began, the machine powering on agonizingly slowly. "Well, I'm starting to get bored," 17 decided. "Let's have a little fun with them," 18. "Sounds good to me," his female counterpart replied. Gohan and Trunks tensed for battle, putting themselves between the androids and the time machine. Gohan's golden aura rippled as tension built up in his body. Trunks snarled as he powered up to maximum, his canines elongating into fangs and his eyes blazing yellow, another trace of Zarbon's DNA. "Alright, come on," he yelled, his determination to protect Break and assure she made it safely to the past completely overriding his fear of the androids. "Ah, so you do want to fight." 17 narrowed his eyes. "That's good. It's so boring when they give up and try to run away. Chasing humans is only fun for a couple of minutes, then it just gets repetitive." "Yeah." Gohan charged forwards, surprising his enemies by making the first move, his jump kick taking 18 off her feet. He pressed his advantage, his fists flying and landing a stream of furious blows, but realized after several seconds that she could easily have dodged if she wanted to. She just felt like showing off her durability today. "Damn it, what does it take?" he grumbled, bringing his arm around for another attack. She saw it coming and vaulted over his head, laughing to herself a little as she landed behind Gohan, facing away from him. Trunks was left facing off against 17. The dark-haired android brushed back his hair, smirking. "This won't take long," he said. "You've made yourselves very annoying, running around ruining our games. I think it was last week you stole a few of our playthings. So we'll have some fun killing you, and then we'll get around to the girl, whatever it is she's trying to do." That set off something inside Trunks, and he leapt at 17, but the android intercepted his attack with one hand, whirling the other around and smashing it into Trunks' side, jarring against his ribs. Trunks staggered off to the side, and 17 casually walked over towards him. Trunks whirled, firing a continuous stream of energy bolts from both hands, but they impacted on his implacable foe with no visible effect. 17 just grinned, then his image wavered. Within a second, he was inches from Trunks, and then the android thrust his hand forwards, and all the pain in the world gathered itself up and dropped into Trunks' stomach. "Ah!" he shrieked, and Break looked up on hearing the noise, frantically trying to hurry the time machine up. It had initiated its final countdown, and had only a few seconds to go before it was fully ready. The picture that greeted Break brought tears to her eyes and despair to her mind. Gohan was on the floor trying to get up, but every time he made an effort to stand, 18 kicked him back down, tutaying and shaking her head. 17 had shoved his arm right through Trunks' middle, dark green blood dripping off of his hand, and was chuckling to himself as wordless screams fought their way out of the boy's mouth. Trunks gathered all his willpower and forced himself to speak, staring 17 right in the eyes. "I'm dying now, I know that, you killed my father, and all his friends, and, now me too." But, he grabbed hold of 17's upper arm and held on with all his might. "I'm not going alone." Energy started to crackle up and down his body, and 17's eyes widened. He tried to pull his arm out, but the combined force of his own attack piercing his victim's body and Trunks' death grip was too much for him to escape in such a short space of time. White light, hissing and spitting, shimmered around the two of them, and all too quickly, they were consumed in a colossal explosion. Tears flowed freely as Break pressed the ignition, and with little more than a quiet hum and a gentle vibration, she was transported 20 years into the past, leaving her adoptive family to fight and die without her. Age 764. "And that's when I got back here," Break finished telling Goku. "I took a few minutes to compose myself, then went to deal with King Cold." "Huh. And here I thought you had everything under control." Goku looked genuinely concerned. "I wonder if Gohan will be alright." "I don't know." Break shrugged, rubbing her eyes. "Maybe Trunks' sacrifice killed 17. Maybe not. Either way, maybe Gohan escaped, and maybe they killed him. I just don't know. I carried out the plan anyway. Do you understand now? I wanted to tell Raditz more, since he's the Super Saiyan and therefore our best hope, but I haven't been born yet. Who knows what'll happen if he finds out. I might never exist. But I can trust you, right?" She looked at him hopefully, and Goku saw past the mystery visitor from the future to the frightened child underneath. You won't tell anybody what I've told you? Sure. Goku gave a thumbs up, much to her relief. I'll tell everybody about the androids, and what to expect, but as for you, I'll just tell them to wait and see. Okay? Thanks so much. She did her best to smile, but again, it was obvious that happiness had been a rare thing for her growing up. Alright, look. If you all train hard these 3 years, you'll stand a better chance when the androids do appear. Plus, you'll have Raditz, and who knows, maybe you can become a Super Saiyan as well. Hey, that'd be cool, Goku chuckled. I wonder what my hair would look like. By the way, how did you become a Super Saiyan? What happened? Nothing, actually. For some reason, I've been able to transform from an early age, but my emotions get even more out of control than a normal Super Saiyan's. I can't think clearly at all. I guess I get that from my mother. It's such a weird coincidence, her turning blonde and getting violent as well. It must have mixed with the Super Saiyan, genes or, something. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. Oh, okay. Goku wondered what this timeline's version of Break would look like. Well, anyway, I wanted to ask, is that my power pole on your back? Yup. Break drew the unique weapon, idly spinning it around. Gohan gave it to me. He always thought of it as a sort of symbol. A reminder of you. He said whenever you were around, everything was alright. Thank you, Break. Goku looked serious again, the mention of Gohan sobering the mood. For coming back to change all this. You, Gohan, Trunks, you shouldn't have had to grow up without any parents. Don't worry, we'll make things right. There was something encouraging about his words. I believe you, Goku. Good luck, all of you. She looked apprehensive. Well, I have to go. I don't want to stay here too long, or I might affect the timeline in more ways than I intended, and I have to find out if anybody survived. But once I've checked how things are in my future, I'll return, 3 years from today, and see if I can help you against the androids. That sounds great. Goku waved in a mock salute. See you then. He watched the girl from the future fly off into the wastes, presumably back towards wherever she'd hidden her time machine, or, if it was in a capsule, simply to a remote location to use it. So sad, she's a kid who's had to grow up far too soon. Well, are you going to explain what all that was about? Raditz was practically venting steam in impatience. I can't really tell you all of it. Will you trust me? For her sake, a lot of what she's told me has to remain a secret until later. Goku was clearly uncomfortable with keeping the truth a secret. Please? Well, damn it, what can you tell us? His brother asked. Goku explained carefully all about the androids, their appearance and abilities. As for the girl, she'll return in time to help us fight the androids. By then, I think it'll be safe to tell you the rest. It must be something extremely important, Tien thought to himself, if even Goku can resist telling the truth. By the way, Goku continued, pointing to Raditz's plain brown, somewhat ragged clothes. What's with the caveman getup? Well, the pod I got into had a pre-programmed route set for the planet Yardrat, and I had to go there before I could get it to take me to Earth. I stayed there for a while, but their style of clothing was ridiculous, so I made my own. Raditz sighed. I had a lot to think about, staying on Yardrat. It struck me as exactly the kind of rich, beautiful planet with weak natives that I'd have conquered while working for Frieza, wiping out the entire population without a second thought. But they didn't know of Frieza or the Saiyans, so they offered me nothing but kindness. They were all living breathing beings, individuals, each with families, lives, histories, their own little personality quirks. His voice was wavering. The kind of people who offer shelter to a complete stranger, nursing them back to health and letting them stay for weeks in their homes. I even made friends with some of them, would you believe it? But, before, I've killed so many people just like them. I would have, a year ago. I almost wanted to kill the Yardrats, too, for no reason other than that's just what I do. He looked over at Goku, his face a battleground of emotion. Hey, Raditz. Goku put a hand on his brother's shoulder. It's okay now. You didn't, is the important thing. You've changed. That's just it, the older Saiyan snapped. I don't know where I stand, Goku. He continued so quickly, Goku didn't have time to ask what had happened to Kakarot. I've changed, but not enough, or maybe too much. I'm not like you, the things I've done, I don't think I ever can be. But I'm not like I used to be, like Vegeta still is. I can't just do what I want with no moral cares. I want to kill, but I can't bring myself to. I'm a saiyan warrior, but I don't know what that means anymore. I'm sorry. Goku was wide-eyed, trying to empathize, but he had been blessed with very little moral ambiguity in his life and found Raditz's conflict difficult to imagine. But I'm not sure I can help. It sounds like you need to sort some things out. Your state of mind right now, it really doesn't sound very healthy. Raditz took 10 seconds to mentally compose his reply. I'm going, he decided. Where? I've been in space for far too long. I've learned a technique that lets me travel anywhere instantly, and I've finally found the energy signature of the person I've been waiting to see for months. He brushed Goku off, raised 2 fingers to his forehead and vanished. It wasn't simply speed, there was no energy to follow. His ki simply disappeared, instantly reappearing on the other side of the planet. Launch, currently in her shy, blue-haired state, was humming to herself as she stood on the beach outside a rebuilt cane house, idly skimming stones across the ocean. The way the rocks flew across the surface of the water, framed against the sunset, was strangely mesmerizing. Her last one bounced 6 times, the day's record, before being plucked out of the air. Raditz stood on the sand in front of her, holding the stone out. Is this yours? He asked, smiling, despite his inner turmoil when he saw her. Launch beamed, skipping forwards and hugging him around the waist. I knew you'd come back. I knew it. Why had she missed him so much? Truthfully, she didn't know, they hadn't been that close when he'd left for Namek. Maybe she was drawn to that difference, that uniqueness, and you didn't get more different than an alien warrior. Besides, she'd sensed there was more to him than the arrogant exterior he projected. Raditz had similar thoughts, should he be getting too attached to this human? But there was something special about her, in both personas. The blonde one was always questioning, confronting him, practically the only human never to show any fear of him. Maybe she reminded him of his own warlike people. And as for the shy one, there was something in her eyes. Trusting, not judging anyone. And right now, he needed that. Hey, hey. He threw the stone to the side, and gazed down at her. She only came up to the tall alien's shoulders. He took her hand in both of his. It's okay. Everything's fine now. The moment was somewhat ruined when neither of them knew what to say next. Raditz started to say something, realized how ridiculous it sounded, and tripped over his own tongue, ending up with a sort of senseless mumble. Launch laughed out loud. In retrospect, it was better than anything he could have said. Raditz stood on the roof of Kame House, bracing himself against the cold wind. It was midnight, or close enough. I've decided, he said to nobody at all. He had sat up with Launch all night, just talking. Talking about everything they could think of, until it didn't matter what they were saying anymore. It was communication, the odd girl out and the runt of the litter finding something they never knew they'd been missing. And now she was asleep, he found himself still needing to talk. What he'd decided, it needed to be said aloud. It made it a promise of sorts. This planet, with its wonderful, ridiculous, oblivious people, it's worth defending. I've seen where the life I used to live leads. You die, forgotten, on some barren little world in the middle of nowhere. Or you live, and end up just like Frieza and his family. How could he have hated them so much? The Saiyans were really just like them. I won't live that way anymore. Without trying to, he burst into his Super Saiyan form, lighting up the night for miles around. Accidents were narrowly avoided as distant ships mistook him for a lighthouse. For the first time in his life, he had something to fight for. Something to lose. This is my home now, and when these androids show themselves, I'm going to send them straight to hell.
If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kaioshin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my Patreon. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Nicholas Berenger, Ben Phillips, Yamatancho, Taco TSK, Jose Torres. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here until next time.